the kind of what they call the great acceleration of the 50 years since 1950, just about when I was born, in which, although the intensity and the kind of energy intensity of the economy had been established, that this acceleration, this hockey stick graph, which has caused us all the stress and things that today, had only just begun. Fast forward 20 years to when I finally completed my education, I tried to make sense of this as an author in books that had different titles and approaches, but they all had something in common, which was I was always looking for examples of people in different contexts doing things to meet daily life needs that would be less damaging than the ways that we'd inherited from the Industrial Revolution. And so my books have all in different ways been descriptions of things that could happen differently through the lives and the activities of people actually doing it. So in other words, not a theoretical approach, but more of a journalistic one, which is, so far as I have a practice, it's as a journalist. But as the years went by, we're talking about a 40-year period in which I wrote books in different ways to try and make sense of what was happening. I started to understand that actually telling people things in books was important and maybe valuable for a few people, but was much more exciting if you could get the people doing the projects to come together and tell each other what they were doing and explore together how they could help each other. So that's how I became a conference organizer from the 1990s onwards, conference called Doors Perception that started in the Netherlands, but then the last half decade were in India. And again, these conferences in different ways, they had themes like Info Eco, you can see on the left there, but they're all about practitioners coming together to say, here is what I'm doing. Isn't it cool? I'm not being naive. Yes, they were there to promote themselves, but the value I think that everybody got from those events, first in Europe and then in India, was meeting people doing projects that they certainly hadn't met each other before. And most of the time, they hadn't actually heard that these activities were even taking place. Jump forward to 2021, and I finally moved from the Netherlands to here in France, which is my bioregion, and each of us will say something about where we are. We're at the far south of France. If you look at the top left picture, that's somebody's version of all the bioregions in France. It's a controversial subject, but the red arrow points to roughly where we are. And the map below that is the Cevennes region of where we are, which by most people's account is a very beautiful, it's a big national park. And most people who've heard of it or have been here have memories of the great beauty and these rolling green hills and so on. But as a reminder to myself, as much as to you, through the 23 years that I've been here in the Cevennes, working in different contexts, the great acceleration has duly continued. And so although the Cevennes bioregion is a very gorgeous looking place at first sight, behind the scenes, so to speak, there's a lot more rough edges taking place, particularly around water in our case, but the general subject of fighting over who gets what water and when really, I think, is as extreme here as anywhere in Europe. And there's been a battle for probably the last 10 years between agribusiness wanting to build larger and larger industrial scale water facilities and activists and small farmers and all sorts of other people saying, no, this is the wrong way to approach it. And this is an example of where the state and big agribusiness have been on one side and a very kind of diverse network of other people in the opposition. It's got quite hairy and violent in times. So this is the other side of this beautiful pastoral looking bioregion that I showed you in the slide before. And I think anywhere you go in the world, you'll see a similar contrast between the stresses and strains of climate change and economic transition, however things may look on the surface. But when I got to France, one of the first things I did was to continue my previous practice of saying, okay, let's see what's happening that has a positive connotation for the people who are kind of progressive. And so I organized with many colleagues a biennial in a different part of France, actually called City Eco Lab, which not for the first time in my own case, we brought together 100 projects from different parts of that bioregion in France. And I don't need to tell you in detail, the point being that Of all those 100 projects, I would say 90% of them were not known to each other, not for sure known to the rulers of the region and the department and the city that had hosted the event, not known to most of the media. And so it's kind of a bunch of strangers, even though everybody lived within a 50 or 60 kilometer radius of this big shed where we met. And so the lesson of that is there is always activity out there, but you have to go and look for it. And so this brings me to what is happening in my bioregion that makes me positive or fills me with hope. And that is to say, another way of saying, what is my practice contributing to the situation here? And I think I've just realized in preparing this 10-minute talk that I'm not actually materially or organizationally helping these particular projects, but that my work is to make them visible to each other and to the broader citizens. So the first of them is the agro-pastoral tradition of this part of France, which stretches into Spain. It's quite inspiring to me just how many young people are now getting into the business of working on semi-nomadic sort of basis with different animals. And I think the positive thing here, which I think in terms of our discussion later on, is that it's not just individuals taking a move into something exotic looking. There is an infrastructure in the form of training programs and schools that helps to sustain this transition towards a combination of very old and very new forms of agriculture. So on the left there, you can see a report that some people from Fibershed in California made about the training the next generation of graziers in Europe, in which one of our training centers was one of the exhibits. Nobody knows about training shepherds, but if you don't train shepherds, you're not going to make much progress in terms of sustaining and transforming their economy. A second favorite project of mine is this one here, 20 kilometers from me, called Etica Mondo, Ethical World. I told you about the fights about mega reservoirs and the sort of background stresses, political and so on. On the plus side, these friends of mine are building a kind of ecological reservoir and lake system, somewhat inspired by things you find in Bali, somewhat inspired by the ancient patterns of agriculture here in the region. It's happening right near me in almost complete invisibility, but it's quite extraordinary how many people flock to come and volunteer or to take part in workshops and work camps to get this activity going. This is coexisting with the fights that are happening elsewhere in the region about the mega reservoirs. The food system in this part of France, I think, is very well connected. It's not exotically well connected. In my local farmer shop, as you can see, there's a map on the wall with some pins and some bits of string. The point is that the infrastructure is run by and designed by farmers for themselves. Everything you buy in that shop, as well as in the market, is produced by somebody on the wall. And one of those people will be working in the shop. So you're talking about a kind of footprint in our little town of the commune to commune, 30,000 people. To some extent, everybody knows a producer and or is connected to a production network directly, not through intermediaries. That, I think, is a very positive feature. We have a lot of work in this part of France, actually all over France, of repurposing abandoned or fallen down buildings. In the olden days, it'd be rich foreigners would buy barns and castles and chateaus and do them up, but they're in shorter supply now. The head of the French architect said, we don't need more new buildings, but we need to refurbish a lot of old ones. So you have people like the nomadic carpenter movement in the top, or the stone, people teaching people how to be stonemasons in the bottom. And on the left, one of the more remarkable network services in France is called they call it the Oasis movement. It's a nationwide group of technical specialists. So if you want to go and start a farm or occupy a building or create some sort of enterprise, they will provide very much either at cost or free expert technical advice. Thousands of people are involved with that. It's pretty invisible. And so to conclude, as I said, my bioregioning practice is to observe what is happening in my region and say, hey, wait a minute, there's a lot happening. What do they need? Have they met each other? What can one do to help them be connected? and the scale of and the intensity of activity that is thinly spread over the country, I think, is not widely understood. On the top there, you see something called the Transitions Factory. It's a platform which represents 400 plus initiatives around the country. We have a Ministry of Ecological Transition, which I'm fairly sure most countries don't have one of those. It's completely not at all integrated with the ministries that are trying to sort of wage military war on the protesters against the dams. No government is homogenous. They have a program called Territorial Project Support, Aid Territoire, which of 4,000 projects around France have received money for that. And in the bottom, a very impressive, thousands of people are taking part in a MOOC, an online course on how to organize to reanimate your territory or your bioregion. Just started last month. Tremendously well done. It's all happening around me. So my question to my colleagues is, what is the one thing that's happening in your bioregion that people like me should know about, and we should spread the word? Because the practice that I'm describing today is precisely that, making visible that which is maybe invisible to everybody else, and then connecting and then adding qualities and services to that. Okay, so that's my self-introduction. I'll stop sharing. I'll try and stop sharing. Does anybody know how to stop sharing when you're highly? There we go. So.
There should be a little thing at the top of the screen, John.
Stop sharing. Are you there?
Well done.
Okay. Well done, me. So, shall we go on to Jan Boelen? Jan, are you ready to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, John. Thank you, Isabel, and thank you for having me here. My name is Jan Boelen. And I hope you start seeing my screen now. Voilà. I'm Jan Boelen. I will shortly introduce myself, my angle or my wish. What I want to share today is bioregional design practices. I'm very much inspired by John Thackara and his practices. That is something that was on the road of my career in Belgium, artistic director of Z33, a place for contemporary art and design, already an ongoing following. Also as head of the Master's Social Design at Design Academy in Eindhoven. And afterwards, and during the period, I started to develop biennials. And one that led to the endeavor that is Atelier Luma was in Ljubljana, biennial that was directly, and I don't know if John knows that, inspired on the project in Saint-Étienne Eco City Lab. Putting people together, many disciplines, showing them to each other is something I really like and I think is super important. I start, I'm here as artistic director indeed of Atelier Luma. And Atelier Luma is based and part of Luma Arles, a cultural institute in south of France, where John is a bit more north. We are a bit more south, on the edge, in fact, of the sea, 45 kilometers from the sea. And in between the sea and us ourselves, it's the Parc National de Camargue is situated. It is a former place where the industry was based in a railway station, and now it's blocked. Voila. We call ourselves a bio-design lab. Bio as we are interested in the human and the non-human and how that lives together. We use design to connect, and we have a structure, an infrastructure to bring all these resources together. We work following a certain open methodology where we what I often say, don't research, but we find things in a region. We try to connect them. That can be heritage, that can be reconnecting with science and technology, that can be connecting with crafts, with needs that are there, and we try to engage, implement these findings that are connected and prototyped into new applications, and we try to share that knowledge with others. How? I will explain. Here you see a kind of one of the designers in the team. We are approximately a team of 20 people, multidisciplinary, indeed, a lot of designers, but also a biologist, also a lab, engineers, a whole multidisciplinary team of people that work in our labs. Again, sheep, we are interested in undervalued resources like wool, and seeing what can happen with that. Merino d'Arles is one of these resources. We look how they can be dyed and with natural colors, how industries can be reactivated, and value chains throughout can be connected and reconnected again. The qualities change throughout the years because the wool is not, the sheeps are not there anymore for the big industrial standardized and normalized processes. So we look for new applications. We look how we can avoid plastics and for instance, here we are looking how seeds can be made with rice, something that is quite common in the Camargue, or we look to the leftovers of the olive pressing and how that can be extruded and mixed with minerals and can become a chair where all these elements finally end up in interiors. The walls are from mussel shells, the mosquito gazes are from paper, and we have many of these kind of research streams where we look to the sourcings, how they can be processed, how that can be shared, how it can be exhibited, and how it can be transmitted to all kind of publics that might become partner in these endeavors. We look into salt, one of the most abundant materials in the world, and we see what we can make out of it, and we look into crystallization processes, as it only uses wind and sun in order to produce wall applications in buildings. Salt is interesting for energy, but it is one of the not only undervalued and overlooked materials. We also try to look and to make software for these kind of new materials, although they are like ages there, and see how they can be used in different ways and how it can be shared with design communities. One of the biggest projects I wanted to share is this building we renovated. It's one of the buildings on the site of Luma in the Parc des Ateliers. It's a 2,000 square meters building that we renovated over a period of 3 years together with 2 teams of architects, Assemble and BC Architects. We tried to look and we developed 20 materials from the region in a circle of 70 kilometers. And we used also the building site as a place, as a mine, to use the materials itself from the building itself to build the building. We looked around what is in the estuary of the Rhône, in the wetlands. And with that, we built our lab with rammed earth, with the bricks that were produced on this place. And here you see a view. The floors are made from the roof tiles. Here you see the workshop spaces. The whole building is isolated with rice straw and natural ventilated. And here the space is finished. The building is connected by the materials with the landscape, but it's also an ecosystem in itself. We collect the gray and the green and the yellow water to irrigate our garden and filter the water by the algae that we use for our research itself. So we use design as a tool for transition towards a bioregion. We are interested in to reconnect and connect and build relations with people, human and non-human, with the resources, with the undervalued resources. Materials are heavy and should stay local, and ideas and people are light and should be global. So that means that we do that in several places. We look into the Emirates in the desert and look what in that bioregion can be done and what can be developed. And we are interested in building a network of what we call biofabric places where these materials could be produced. So how these going on in Vienna can help each other, and how you cook literally materials in different places in the same way but differently. And we try to work each time together with industries, universities, and build local networks with the city, with all kind of partners in order to find cooperatives that could go on with building and producing these materials. We're mainly at this moment focused on building materials and looking how waste streams in cities and bigger regions can contribute to a healthier building industry. All this is, and this methodology is written down in our book, Atelier Luma, Bioregional Design Practices, and it's in 2 languages, in French and in English. And we hope to share that with this community. So this is a little bit what Atelier Luma is and what we do in a nutshell. And I don't know if I'm in the time or without, completely out of the time. Voila.
It's perfect, Jan. We're running a few tiny minutes over, but that's not a problem. And I think there's enough to talk about for several days that we just heard there. So we'll come back to that in a moment, but I think we should keep moving. And by coincidence, we have 2 from France and 2 from Ireland. So I'll now introduce the first of our 2 guests from Ireland, Brendan Dunford, who I just have admired from afar, including their work for so long. And so it's a great personal thrill for me to hear from him today. Without further ado, Brendan, tell us about, your extraordinary work.
Thanks very much, John, and thanks for the invitation, and welcome everybody. So we're here in the west of Ireland, and it's a rare, beautiful, sunny evening. So it's good to be with you. So I just have a few slides to share as well to tell you a little bit about what we do. But I have to say, compliments to the previous presenters. It's fascinating. I think that story. So can you see me? Yeah. Is that okay? Right. So I want to tell you a little bit about a place called the Burren in the west of Ireland. Like some of your landscapes in the south of France, it's a limestone landscape, but here in the Burren, it's this bare karstified landscape, so it's quite unique. It's a very special place, and I'm lucky to be living here for the past 10 years or so. I was asked to introduce myself. Well, here I am. So that's me. And the reason I chose this picture is because the story I have to tell isn't really a story about me, but it's a story about a lot of people, farmers, farm advisors, scientists, policymakers, and we're all on a journey. And like we haven't nearly arrived at our destination yet, but I think we're making progress. We're moving, and I think it's in a good direction. The region itself, you can see it's based here in the west of Ireland. Midwest of Ireland on the Atlantic coast. So it's called the Burren. My slide is moving, I hope, guys, yeah? Anybody out there? But I'll assume...
Yes, it's doing where it's just moving. It's going well.
Okay. So here's what the Burren looks like right now. It's got beautiful orchids, gentians, alpine, Arctic, Mediterranean plants growing on these grasslands. It contains about 70% of Ireland's native flora, which is really significant. It's quite a repository because at the moment in Ireland, we have a declared biodiversity crisis and a climate crisis, and the Burren is one of the last great landscapes that we have, which is relatively intact and very biodiverse. But it's also a farmed landscape. It's a people where people have lived and farmed using livestock for about 6,000 years now. We have archaeological sites dating to 6,000 years ago. But it's a landscape which has always existed in balance with farming, by which I mean too much farming and your flowers start to disappear because it's just too intensive to management, but also too little farming. And the Burren tends to revert to scrub and to woodland, and you start to lose a lot of your biodiversity as well. And that's something very profound in a way, because it suggests that farmers, they can be a problem. And we know that the wrong type of farming is definitely a problem for nature and for water quality and for climate. But we sometimes forget that the right type of farming is critical for producing nutritious food, but also to sustain landscapes and to carry on an important heritage, such as in places like the Burren. So my work over the last 20 odd years as a privileged guest in this landscape has been to work with farmers, viewing them as a resource, but mobilizing that resource to improve, I guess, the ecosystems, that services that they deliver from this landscape. So to summarize it, or to paraphrase it, what we're trying to do here is to encourage farmers to deliver more of these ecosystem services, pollinators, water quality, landscapes, cultural heritage, fire prevention within this landscape. So moving from a position where they've just been rewarded and encouraged to produce food to one where we want them to produce food, but in a way as well that will also produce these other really important and increasingly rare services for society. So that journey we've been on, I'm going to summarize it here, what we've learned, and it's okay to write this down, but or to kind of read it in a book, but for us, it's the lived experience that it really boils down to three things. So our challenge is mobilizing farmers to become agents for positive change in the landscape. And to do that, it's all about the pocket. So to change farming, you have to present a good business case, we feel. Secondly, it's about the head, how to support technically these farmers to deliver more for nature. And thirdly, which we often overlook, it's about the heart. It's about getting farmers on side as an environmental resource, because right now across Europe, there's a lot of negativity and a lot of hostility between the farming and environmental sectors for one reason or another that we won't go into. So what I want to do for the next 5 minutes is maybe share some examples of the pocket, the head and heart approach, which have worked really well for us here in the Burren. So one very simple thing that we did was we put a kind of a price on good quality management. So very simply, and this can apply to any farm and any landscape anywhere in the world, we have three scenarios here. Top one, damage. Middle one, very little farming. Bottom one, where there's active farming going on. We've done a simple rapid assessment where we can give each one of those a score out of 10, which reflects its general environmental health. I'm talking about the biodiversity, the water quality, the soil health, the threats from invasive species, and so on. We have a very simple scorecard, which we can do a rapid assessment on, and we link a payment then to that assessment. So the higher the score, the more money the farmer gets for delivering. But we never tell the farmer what to do. We just set him a target, and if he or she chooses to deliver, then they're rewarded. And not all do, of course. If you've got a very low score in your field and you're damaging it or not farming it properly, you have access to funds to improve it. So we'll give you funding to create new watering systems, to repair old fences, to create new, more environmentally friendly feeding systems, and so on. And by accessing that funding, you can drive your score up to a higher score. So farmers have an incentive year on year to improve their environmental outcomes, but critically, they can do it on their own terms using the systems that they want, and we're there to support them. So that's really putting a price on biodiversity and the environmental health and rewarding farmers when they deliver it. So now, rather than improving a grassland to keep more cattle, they can manage the grassland in a way that'll retain the biodiversity and produce maybe less cattle, but of a higher quality. And the economic rationale is therefore to do that. So there's a reward. Also with the payments, we make sure that the payment is fair. Farmers love fair, transparent, prompt payments, and that's really important to remember. Secondly, we're kind of creating opportunities around nature. So we're paying farmers for wall restoration. We're creating these local businesses around making these traditional sheets. Farmers now are taking tours on their land and making money from that because people want to hear the authentic story of the landscape, and who better to tell it than farmers. We have a lovely project north of here called Wild Atlantic Nature, where farmers, like Colm here in the picture, is part of a crew who go around maybe 2 or 3 days a week and are paid to remove rhododendron, which is a highly invasive species on the landscape. So farmers are being paid to produce food, but also being paid to manage the landscapes, delivering services that society wants. So that's making nature pay in a sense, creating a value around it and employment around it as well. Just very quickly on the head, one thing we know very well from Europe at the moment is farmers hate bureaucracy, and I think they really have a point. We're being unbelievably overburdened with paperwork at all levels in the public system, and when we engage with public authorities, unfortunately. You can see why it's there to try and make sure there's no corruption or there's no misspent money, but it's become a huge burden now to doing things. So when we started our program here in the Burren, we eliminated every unnecessary piece of text in any plan and any farm plan, reduced the paperwork. So now our farm plan is 2 pages, a picture of your farm and a list of your scores and a recommendation as to what you can do to improve your scores. And that's it. All the farmer has to do is sign his or her name at the end of the sheet once a year. So getting rid of the paperwork liberates the farmer, and it really gets the farmers on side, mobilizing that resource. And by paying for these results, different fields doing different things at different times, that keeps the countryside complex. And I think when we look at our landscapes in Ireland and elsewhere, they become very simplified monocultures of ryegrass or of conifers. This sort of an approach where different farmers do different things in different ways is really wonderful in terms of the complexity, and nature loves complexity. Finally, just on the head piece, farmers really need to know about what's the best option for the land in terms of ecosystem services. Is it just food production? Is it carbon sequestration? Is it biodiversity? Is it water management? What? So having a local office is really important, because that services, that provides the information, the advice, and help with the paperwork to allow farmers to farm. Having that at a local level is critical. We also provide information to farmers now across Ireland about what you can do for nature. So we create little plans for nature, because we're finding that increasingly both farmers and landowners really want to do something, but they really don't know what to do, and they're afraid of doing the wrong thing. So we provide supports through a plan for nature. And we also provide, with a new program, peer mentorship, because when you work with farmers, you'll appreciate they don't really like outsiders telling them what to do, but they really respect their peers. So we connect farmers who want to farm for nature with peers who have already farmed for nature and who can share their story and give a bit of mentorship to the farmers in question. And then finally, and sorry for rushing through this, but I think the heart piece for me is the missing piece in a lot of our efforts in mobilizing farmers as a resource. We all need a sense of purpose when we go to work every day if we want to do our jobs well. And right now, farmers are kind of digging their heels in, many of them, around what they feel is a persecution when it comes to them and climate and environment. So we need to reposition that. We need to change that. And I think we can start by taking a more positive and celebratory approach. So every year in the Burren, we have We bring some cattle onto the mountain. You can see there's maybe 20 cattle here. It's an old tradition of transhumance, but we open it up to the public. So we might get 1,000 people helping to bring the cattle up onto the mountain every year. And that's shared in national media. And that makes farmers feel very proud of what they do, that what they're doing is producing good food, but looking after an amazing landscape as well. And I think that's the story that we need to tell, that farmers can be a positive force. And to that point, there's a lovely quote here around reimagining farming. Sorry, that's my timer. To change the world, let's start by changing the way we talk about it. And let's highlight those initiatives that are having a positive impact on people and planet to renew our confidence and spur us into action. So with that in mind, we spent the last 5 years identifying leading exponents of sustainable farming across Ireland. There's small farmers, big farmers, male, female, young, old, organic, regenerative, conventional, and they're phenomenal. And I think this, when I was invited today to talk about practice in the landscape, to me, I'm not a practitioner. These people are. These people are the heroes of the piece. These people are the resource right across the Burren, right across Ireland, right across Europe. And we need to celebrate, support, and mobilise that resource. So the Farming for Nature Network, which now actually we have a network in Northern Ireland, in Austria, and in Lithuania as well, that's giving farmers back ownership of the story and making the positive, practical story and inspiring their peers to do more. Final slide. We've been monitoring the field health and environmental health of the Burren for the last 15 years as part of this result-based approach where we reward farmers for their outcomes. And every year since we began in 2010, we've seen an incremental improvement in the environmental health of the Burren. Now, this is Ireland's most prized biodiversity landscape, and for less than €1 million per annum, we've been able to gradually reverse the trend of biodiversity loss and improve it over time. So it just shows, and there's hard data behind this, that farming can deliver for nature, and not just for nature, but according to this piece of external evaluation, deliver for the local economy, deliver for social outcomes as well. But fundamentally, it's about that relationship between people and their place. If we can get that right, we can deliver all sorts of social, environmental, and economic dividends. So that's me. So how do we encourage farmers to deliver more? By incentivizing, supporting, and encouraging them to do that. And my question, I was asked a supply question, my question at the end of all of this is, what can you do to mobilize your farming community to sort of be the leaders in landscape management in your bioregion? What does it take to mobilize that amazing resource? I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brendan. It was inspiring. Can I just say to everybody here, remember that question. What can you do in your bioregion to mobilize and get farmers involved in these discussions and help them do the good work that we know they're able to do? But we'll come back to that in a few minutes, because my final guest, or is not really a guest, he's a member of our group. Chris, would you like to say some words before we move into the discussion?
Thank you very much, John. I think one of the lessons in life when you're doing presentations is don't follow Brendan Dunford. Yeah, obviously I've seen Brendan do quite a few presentations over time, and I mean, I have to say, you know, the work is every bit as brilliant as it looks in loads and loads of ways. And I suppose one of the things that strikes me, and I will introduce me in a minute, but just to follow from Brendan, one of the things that strikes me about the work is that, you know, he's not using the word bioregioning, and if he did use the word bioregioning, it wouldn't be as authentic as the presentation that we heard, you know. So it's using the language that, you know, makes sense to people. So, you know, head, pocket, heart, farming, you know, very just ordinary, how do we do this stuff? And so you introduced me earlier, John, as a professor, which is, that's not quite right, but that doesn't really matter. I do facilitation work with a College of Art in the Burren, so in the same region that Brendan is working. And I suppose the focus of my facilitation work is about connecting people, bringing things together, helping things to evolve. And so my fascination really is about how evolution happens. And I think I'll go without using slides, because I don't think we probably in many ways had enough slides, but I also won't talk for very long, so we get into the discussion. And so I suppose the challenges that we face a lot of the time is that as we try to develop the work, it can feel like someone is telling someone else what to do. Someone is telling someone else what's good for them, and you should do this. And working in a college, of course, education can feel like that completely. You know, education is somebody stands at the front of a classroom and tells you what's right, and you're meant to absorb that and follow it. And so what we've heard from Brendan, I think, is a really radical challenge to all of us, to think about different ways of doing things. And it's the same challenge for people in local government, people in central government, you know, people in different kinds of agencies, about how do we actually get into these relationships that have the potential to deliver the kind of change, the better world we know is possible. And then I suppose, so there's a challenge of the way in which we come together, and then there's also a challenge about how do these things not become overwhelming? So what it tends to feel like is that every time someone comes along and says, "Oh, I've got another thing you need to think about," you know, you need to think about you know, you need to think about biodiversity, you need to think about tourism, you need to think about heritage, you need to think about you know, carbon emissions in different ways. You know, we can just come up with a long list of things that people need to think about. And it just feels like we're making their lives more and more difficult and more overwhelming. So the challenge is how we grow this more holistic, more interconnected approach in a way that doesn't have that overwhelming feel to it. And I suppose I saw Bill in the chat earlier referring to network weavers. I suppose that's what my interpretation of what we're trying to do is. We're trying to bring things together in such a way that we're not telling people what to do, and it's not overwhelming. And in a way, I think that's very simple. But just one other observation I wanted to throw in as well about what makes it work is I'm really interested in kind of where things, if you like, are coming from a positive place, that we're growing something that we feel positive about and that we know to be right, and where things come from a negative place. So you know, a lot of things come from campaigns against or resistance, or you know, really quite negative events. I think we saw that in John's initial presentation as well. And talking just from a college point of view, one of the things I'm really noticing at the moment is a really big opening up in universities generally, which in theory I think comes from a negative place. So this is not just about bioregioning, but universities are, it seems to me, or a lot of people in universities are quite panicking about artificial intelligence, you know, a completely different thing that comes along and effectively promotes a crisis. And that creates an opening up, which is creating opportunities for conversation. So the conversations about the kind of things that we're talking about, the bioregioning, the different kinds of relationships, different kinds of approaches, are suddenly much more possible because of this emergency of that's come up from artificial intelligence. And I think there's other emergencies that are hitting other people in different ways. So just, yeah, this question that I hold about how does evolution happen? How does positive development happen? It feels to me that actually a lot of it is in response to crisis. And I was on a call earlier today, and maybe some people have heard this already. Somebody was saying, rather than talking about meta crisis or poly crisis, we should be talking about meta opportunity and poly opportunity, which I thought was quite a neat observation, that actually, yeah, maybe there's never been a better time for doing this work. You know, and it will be different for, I absolutely acknowledge it's different for people in different places. But an art college, we have a kind of a innocent, naive place where we can just maybe help this stuff along a little bit and grow the relationships without being confronting too much and without being a kind of an enemy to anybody. So anyway, that's hopefully just helps us get into the discussion a bit. But my question would be, how does evolution happen? How can we help positive evolution to happen?
Thank you so much, Chris. I don't think you should underplay, personally speaking, the role of art schools in playing a role in reducing this notion of being overwhelmed, because I think many of us here, I'm sure, have felt that or feeling it now, overwhelmed at the demands of the moment, the size of these tasks that people tell us we have to fulfill very quickly. Whereas one of the roles that art can play is to get us to reframe questions, reframe tasks, reframe our own potential in ways that are less overwhelming, perhaps. But let's come on to that in a moment. I think just we're running a few minutes late, and I absolutely don't want to exclude everybody in this room because, excuse me, we're all here as co-equals. So I think we're going to have 5 minutes of conversation amongst the four of us, and then I'll open up to the floor just a bit after the hour, so we don't reduce you all to just watching. But the two questions that came up from the presentations were, well, from Jan didn't ask this question. Do you have a question you want to add before we start, Jan? For the rest, for your co-presenters, you don't have to, but it's an opportunity. One.
I would. I don't have a concrete question as such, John. No, at this moment, not. Maybe later. Yeah.
So let's become what Brendan said was, look for ways of involving your farmers in your region and getting them to be part of the conversation and to respecting them, making their contributions visible, seeing how they can be helped. It's something which is very different to what I talked about and what Jan talked about, but it is also in terms of place and land at the center of it all. So does anybody have, Jan, for example, have you talked to farmers a lot at Atelier Luma? Have they been part of your work?
In fact, we didn't frame it and formulate it as good as Brendan did. I have to admit, we try to have kind of same strategy. Yeah. It is indeed pocket money is a big motivator. I have to admit, and we came in, and this is how we worked, and maybe it's good to share that strategy. Is we made kind of prototypes. We designed prototypes that were out of a certain material that could be rice or sunflower or another material. And we brought a group of people together with different backgrounds, and also farmers were involved. I take the example of the sunflower because we made sunflower acoustic panels and sunflower wallpaper. And yeah, especially, but also the scientist, everybody was leaning a bit back and saying, this is not possible and we cannot do it. But then suddenly the farmer understood that maybe this was an activity that could go on in the winter after the harvest. So there would be like another seasonality coming in, that he had to do the harvest differently with a different machine. There we would help him with. So we would bring the different machine, we would look together for storage, and then make sure that during the winter, these panels, acoustic panels and other leftovers of the harvest could be stored. So what happened is that the sunflower, everybody is looking to the sunflower and the seeds and but not to the stem. and we were interested in the whole stem and trying to help him not to get rid of it, but really make a new product and material out of it. There, an extra income is coming in, and they understood that a third or a second income stream could come in with a new activity and an ongoing practice. So doing that together with different farmers for rice and sunflower was certainly working. So we didn't do it in a it was really on product based and design based process, not on a scorecard. Yeah.
So I think half the people here are very keen to know who pays for all this wonderful work. I mean, Brendan, you mentioned a number of €1 million. Where does that is to pay for the project, or more importantly, where does it come from? And how do you get that money in the future?
Okay, so it's public funding. It's funded partly through the Common Agricultural Policy and partly through the Irish Exchequer. And the way I look at it, two things. One is that like our food is completely undervalued. You can produce a commodity and get paid the same as a farmer. He will get paid for producing an animal which is of absolutely exceptional quality and manages the landscape. So what the public funding is doing is effectively stepping in where there's a market failure and rewarding the farmer who's delivering more for nature and for the environment than your typical farmer. So it's publicly funded. Now, interestingly enough, there's a new frontier emerging, and that's where there's new directives coming into Europe around corporate sustainability, where companies will be obliged to invest in biodiversity. And the question is, where will they get that biodiversity? I think it's from farmers. I think a lot of farmers feel when it comes to the climate and biodiversity debate, there's a whole industry going on and they have no part of it. So I think this is an opportunity for farmers to farm in a way that will produce better food, but deliver greater environmental outcomes and get paid for their food, but also for their ecosystem services, both from public and private sources.
So, Brendan, you mentioned public funding, but there are what I've encountered in my travels is that there are lots of different levels of public funding, from Europe down to a municipality. They all require lots of work to get the funding in the first place. Do you have some magic ingredient by which you get the funding? So apart from the fact you have a lot more, what's your magic ingredient for getting money?
Persistence.
Right.
No, it's difficult. You know, we're fortunate in Europe that we do have public funding. I think not all countries and people here tonight will have access to that sort of public funding. But in Europe, we do have a big public fund within the Common Agricultural Policy for the environment. I'd argue that it's rarely well spent. So what we're doing is actually squeezing every cent of value from that limited fund within CAP. But yeah, it's public funded, and it does take a little bit of persistence and so on to leverage that funding. But if it works, I think it will come and will keep flowing is the hope.
But you talk about Europe in terms of within Ireland, you have a national government, and then you have regional governments with money, or a municipality?
No, it's really national government. This all comes through national government. Yeah.
Okay. Jan, and then I'm going to open it up after this. I thought money would be an important starting point. You just mentioned in the chat that you're a not-for-profit foundation, but do you get money from governments, or is it from a private sort of sources? Basically?
Oh yeah. We also get the main part is coming from Maya Hoffman. She is a philanthropic and doing indeed culture, arts, and so on. But we also have EU funding, and our projects that we set up with third parties are also co-funded. So if we do something in the Middle East or in Vienna or in the Champagne region or in Korea or in Denmark, it are regional development organizations, cities, cultural institutes that are co-funding our endeavors here.
My second question, just before we open it up, concerns how long these projects have taken to get going, because I think a lot of us feel very, Chris mentioned this notion of being overwhelmed. People go on every single day. We must change everything immediately. Can you share what sort of time frames it's taken to get to where you are now? So Brendan, maybe in your case, you mentioned 10 years at the beginning, but you've been in the region longer.
Yeah, so we began the research here about almost 25 years ago, but the approach we basically introduced over a very short period of time in 2010, and we've basically been replicating that approach ever since. I do think time is a really important one. John, particularly in terms, my work is mainly with farmers, landowners, and I think it takes time to build up trust. It takes time to build relationships. And that's the magic that unlocks, I think, the impact later on. So time is, I know it's a factor in for most of our lives, but particularly for relationship building with rural communities and for, earning trust that will allow them to follow you on a journey. I think that's critically important. And continuity of funding is a big issue. We mentioned funding before very briefly, but it comes in 5 or 6 year cycles. And if you're a farmer, you don't plan in 5 or 6 year cycles, you plan in decades or, generations. And that the continuity and the time scales are really, really important when we're talking about funding these types of activities.
And so for everybody here who's saying, but I've only been here for 2 years or, I'm just starting, the best answer I heard was from somebody from Scotland in the first of our conversations who has worked in partnership with a Rivers Trust that has been there for like 50 years and whose members never thought they were in the regeneration business, or they don't use the word bioregioning, but they have been there for a long time as a kind of a club, responsible as a trust for the rivers. And so our partner, Elle, and her colleagues, they provide the trust because they're already there, but she comes along and says, I will then add activities to your trust work. So do you think that's a generalizable lesson, Brendan or Jan, or Chris actually? Can you find maybe overlooked organizations that have the trust of each other and, for example, farmers and landowners that might not be otherwise accessible? Can that be done in new places? Chris, could you maybe answer that?
I think you absolutely, the trust word is enormously important. So you absolutely have to find who are the people who are trusted. So Brendan was talking about the peer-to-peer education, that one farmer will trust the story of another farmer. It depends exactly what your project is, what you're trying to do. One of the other things Brendan could have talked about is the work in schools. So the involvement of the ordinary village school and kind of just day-to-day education practice is also just it just makes it trusted, ordinary. Who are the people around that people will trust is a tremendously important question, and usually it's a question government will have enormous difficulty with. Government will just be remote and not really understanding how you do these things at a local level.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chris. I'm conscious that the clock is ticking away, whatever digital things do. Can I now open it up to a lot of people here with a lot of expertise and knowledge? Does anybody have a question or a comment? Join the circle. I can't see hands raised here, but Kate, you can help me.
Yeah, I think Bill has raised a hand.
Oh, yeah, there's Bill. Hi, Bill. This is Bill Bio.
Yeah, hi, John. Hi, Brendan, Jan, Chris. I just had a couple of quick comments around the agricultural side of things in particular. So I did pop into the sidebar. Some work that I do directly with Cabot Creamery Cooperative here in the United States, a dairy cooperative of about 500 farms in the Northeast. And they worked with an outfit called Manomet, which is a science-based NGO, to develop something called the Vital Capital Scorecard. And what's interesting about that is that it measures the farmers' social and environmental and economic impacts and impacts on them vis-a-vis the donut, the vis-a-vis sustainability thresholds. that's the fourth level. There are 3 levels above that that are sort of more straightforward direct impacts, if you will. But the fourth layer contextualizes their performance vis-a-vis that level. So I put the link in the sidebar. And then the other thing I would say more from a bioregional approach is that there's work in the Western Massachusetts, which is sort of part of the Connecticut River Valley bioregion that I'm active in, around trying to get 30% of the agriculture from regenerative farming resources by 2030, which when I hear that, I recognize that it's both ambitious and in some ways, reveals the limitations of our current agricultural and food provisioning systems. One would want to have it be 100% by yesterday, if you will, but I think that's so that's just something that the Connecticut River Valley Bioregioning Collaborative has in the past done some cross collaboration and network weaving with the regenerative agriculture initiatives that are happening here in the region. So I just wanted to mention that very briefly.
This touches on something which in our group, when preparing this series, was one of the key things, was that the closer you get to whether or not you use the word to a bioregion, the more unique it becomes, all the ways that it is organized, its history, its geology, and so on. Are you, Bilbao or Brendan or Jan, able to say what you find useful to learn from bioregions in other places? Do you have a kind of an opinion about the kinds of knowledge or the kinds of practices that are most useful to share across geographies? Brendan? I think
I tend not to think too much in terms of bioregions, but I do appreciate and understand the concept. I think every place is special, and the relationship with that place, particularly in the Irish context, is special. So here in my landscape, in the Burren, people don't relate to the Burren. They don't relate to this bioregion. They relate to their parish and their sports club and their church community and stuff like that. But taken all together, they build a sense of a region or a bioregion or a cultural region, probably more appropriately if you want to put it like that. Just one quick comment on what Bill said. Really interesting, Bill. I know there's a number of kind of ways of assessing. Like I know the Savory Institute have metrics as well for measuring. Ours is kind of different in that what we want to do is we want to create an incentive for farmers to take action to improve their environment. So we don't want to measure. We're not really too interested in measuring. We want to be able to say to the farmer, well, there's an issue here, maybe with your water, with your soils. If you fix that, your scores are going to go up. So it's a way of motivating action. We're not too interested in measuring a lot of stuff. We just want to make the change. We want to get farmers acting, but doing so on their terms. Not saying you have to do it, but if you do it, this is the reward that's going to be there for you. Just those 2 quick points.
That's a great point, and I think that's something that Cabot, the co-op, very much wants to do in the sense that it's a cooperative that's owned by the farmers, but the cooperative can't tell the farmers what to do, and it plays a very deferential sort of supportive role. And the incentive side of things, I think, is absolutely vital. And so one thing that they're looking into is the role of farms in carbon sequestration and tapping into carbon markets. That's still early stages here, but it's certainly something that I think is of interest because it's an additional revenue stream for an ecosystem service that is being provided but is not currently monetized. So it's complex, but it's being explored.
Brendan, can I just sort of ask a follow-up? I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to have to steal your time. You say you're not interested in measuring, but these incentives that you offer to farmers, somebody say that if you make your wall longer or stronger or put in a gate or put in a water source, you will be rewarded for that. Is that not, it's description but not measuring? How do you differentiate? What does the farmer have to do? Is it a quantity of improvements they have to make?
Yeah, so my point, I think it's a really important point to tease out because I think we can become obsessed with measuring stuff, particularly carbon and biodiversity. But how do you measure nature? How do you quantify it? it's just, you can get yourself lost in doing that and spend an awful lot of money and then have to replicate it farm on farm. So our approach is a little bit different. I'm not criticizing any other approach, but we've lost so much nature and biodiversity in this country. We want action to bring it back. And the people who can undertake the action are the farmers. So we wanted to create a measurement system which the farmers could themselves apply and understand. So the field score is a very simple way of a farmer saying, that's what a 10 out of 10 looks like. That is perfect. That's what you should aspire to. But we recognize you may not get there, but you can take actions which will improve your score. So you can, to move from a 6 to 7, you can fence off or wall off that water supply, which is being polluted at the moment, and that'll bring your score up to an 8. And we'll give you some funding to build a wall, or you can remove those invasive species, and that'll bring your score up. So you have an incentive, an annual premium, an annual payment, which will be the incentive for you to undertake the action. We give you advice and support to take on the action itself. But really, we score thousands of fields, and it's rapid. Like, you can score a large field in 30 minutes with this system. So it's not trying to capture the full picture of what's on that site. It's trying to give the farmer a signal about what he or she can do to improve the condition. And I think that's the distinction for us. It's about action as opposed to about measurement.
If I hear you say that, I can imagine that the public or the people from that community, maybe they would want to help the farmer do the improvements to get the score. Is that something you've experienced, or is it just you, the farmer, only gets paid by central government paying some money?
Well, the farmer can, what happens is you kind of generate a little mini industry out of it. So a lot of contractors themselves, farmers, take on the work. So they go repairing walls or removing scrub elsewhere. We don't tend to use volunteers as much, because if you've much experience using volunteers, there's an awful lot of work involved, and there's all sorts of stuff around insurance concerns and all that for farmers. So it tends to be the farmer, him or herself, or else a team of local contractors who do the work fairly efficiently. But that is we access to labor to do this kind of work, and skills and knowledge as to how to do that's becoming a premium resource now, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, and you have a hand up. Okay, hello.
Yeah, thank you, John. Last part of what Brendan said opened it up a little bit. I wanted to say that we should not try to focus on one group. It is a societal and cultural shift that needs to be made, and farmers are felt mainly alone, left alone by society. They were contracted and had to deliver something for the cheapest price. So if you bring them back in networks and you connect them with different industries, and you give, it's also about kind of building networks and support structures around them. I think that is something which is overlooked. They are not just, it cannot be reduced, the whole discussion to farmers. That is a bit what I want to say. Yeah.
I would just add, as I'm looking for hands, one of the most inspiring examples I know of in Europe about reducing not just leaving farmers to cope by themselves is in the further east from you, Jan, in the Muansatu farmers and schools network. So they have this notion of bio-canteens, and a small town over, again, 10, 12 years, connected the 25 schools in its in a constituency to 20 or 30 farms around the place, so that every farm and every school has a direct relationship with each other. The farmer brings the food to the school, the students go to the farm to find out how it works. That's now spreading around France and Europe, after people understanding that the value is not just about the cost of food going into a school canteen, but there's so many different other values created by one relationship between one school and one farm. And that's what I think Brendan was also talking about. We don't need to have massive scale things to generate a lot of good outcomes. So the bio canteens, I totally recommend that people check that out if you're looking for examples of very practical ways to connect farms to communities. Anybody else?
I might make a very quick response. I agree farmers
Yeah.
are part of just one group of actors. In the context of the Irish landscape and in context of the biodiversity crisis, they just happen to be the key resource, which is why we focus particularly on them. Yeah. And the second thing I'd say is that, like on a positive note, I actually think landowners, farmers, not just in Ireland and elsewhere, but they're really up for this. They really want to be the difference, but they don't feel supported. And I think you have to say that we need system change, but consistently we get systems failure when it comes to supporting farmers to deliver these outcomes that we want. I think that's the problem. I don't think it's farmers aren't up for the battle. I think it's we've never really tried, or we've never really done it that well before. And the Burren is, it's a small place. It's a reasonably good example, but unfortunately we don't have too many other great things. I know there's great people doing great things, but even what we do here is very limited as compared with the potential to do something really significant with our farming communities across the world to address our crises.
But you said at the beginning, Brendan, that this little place. I have personally been inspired by so many of the things you do. At a certain point, there was a map of Ireland that I think it was a nature-friendly farming network that was then called, with what looked like all the fields in Ireland on a map. And here you're talking now about field scores. To me, it's so powerful to imagine relating to one field than to the climate or some word like regeneration or bioregion, all these abstract words. But if I could have a relationship with one field and one farmer, I can just imagine that would be much more motivating than, calls to global action instantly. And so I just wanted to say that particular, I don't know if you were responsible for that picture. I've shown it to so many people that said, yes, we want one person, one field. Well, one person, one farmer. It's so powerful to have a relationship that is not abstract and global. So I just wanted to thank you for that, if it was you or one of your colleagues. How are we doing?
Maybe, John, just to make the link, I see Melina's comments in the chat about indicators, and Brendan mentioned earlier about how big business is being pushed towards certain types of monitoring and potentially contributing money towards biodiversity, which is a kind of indicator business at a massive scale. And certainly some of the contacts I have with business, that there's a real kickback now to the greenwashing and the superficiality of a lot of the indicators. So I do think the power of stories, small scale, integrity, the time may have come. I think more people are more ready to just to say this, that this isn't just a numbers game.
It's a field game. It's not about the numbers, it's about the field and the farmer. I think to me that's just so motivating. Isabel Carlisle has her hand up.
Yes, I've got a question which is also about farming. So currently this week, my organization, the Bioregional Learning Centre, is running a learning journey for climate adaptation around South Devon. And we've been talking to a lot of farmers. And one of the issues that we're coming up against is that here on Dartmoor and in South Devon, a lot of farmers are getting very close to retirement age and their children don't want to take on the farm. And in the spirit of looking for gaps and stepping into gaps, where we see there is a real gap is there's no support at the moment for young farmers wanting to get access to land and wanting to get access into farming, to be able to team up with these older farmers who would like to see their farm go to people who they know and they value because they see they're going to do good work. And this also is potentially a really powerful way in which all these kind of ideas and practices around regeneration and biodiversity gain can be taken into the future. So I'd love some comments about that. What do you see going on in your regions?
This is where I know for a fact that different countries have programs about next generation farming. I think in the United States, there are quite a few different activities. Maybe somebody here can share that. In France, we have a Ministry of Ecological Transition, one of whose tasks is this whole question of generational transfer. Does anybody from the US here know about, generational change in farming? Well, maybe you don't know right now, but that's the sort of, for me, a very good example of what this network might be able to do. Maurice Saint-Siom, you might know. Can you demute yourself, Maurice? Maurice is from the Bioregional Weaving Labs, so yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for this very inspiring conversation. And I'd like to answer to Isabel. I met a group of farmers in the southwest of France in the Landes, so which is mainly an area where there's a huge forest, but there's also farming at the edge near the Basque Country. And there's a group of 100 farmers, very active for a very long time, to move out of the, I would say, mainstream farming, which is corn, and done by huge cooperatives, which are pushing mainly for corn. And so they have been able to diversify their culture, but also they have organized a very innovative program to transfer, I would say, the transmission of farms. So the farmers, I mean, they have a program helping. They are not big farms, but it's to bring a network of new farmers, before 5 person, having different activities and bringing additional values on the farm. So plus it helps because there's a kind of housing crisis in this area. So the farm, which are huge, can be separated and to host a team, I would say a network, a team of new farmers, and the program is supported, or I would say there's a help from a sociologist who can also bring other dimensions than just farming, but also the what makes a community alive and other elements. I'll be happy to share more information with you.
Thank you, Maurice. We've got 5 minutes remaining. I'm going to call it.
And maybe, John, maybe I would like to ask a question to Chris about the weaving part of his work. And I'm very interested by the art college and how the art college help on the relationship in the area.
Did you hear that, Chris Chapman?
Yeah, no, I'll come in briefly. I think that it says the network weaving, and who is well placed to do network weaving, and there are people, you find people in situations who are nobody's enemy, if you like. That's the first starting place. And so, I mean, a completely different example, we did a big event in the art college 5 or 6 years ago called Towards a More Creative Education System. And so we brought together people from all over the education system who traditionally had had a lot of conflict and disagreement about how to move things forward. And we were just a very small independent art college, and we just said, look, we'll bring you together and we'll have conversations. And we called the conversation something that nobody could object to: towards a more creative system. Everybody would love a more creative system. And that just became a way of beginning the conversation and starting to build the relationships. And Brendan was with us, and we went for a walk on the land, and we went to the pub in the evening, and so on, so on, so on. And that's led to a whole series of initiatives around change in education. So that, I mean, it's a slightly different example, but I think that there's something about who the people are to do it. And then another thing I think we would put enormous emphasis on is just straightforward hospitality. So, the welcome, and, in our culture, the cup of tea, and just really simple food and a smile, and just really simple, straightforward things. But they're things that lots of other people don't do. Lots of other people think that they're going to achieve something by inviting you to the most expensive venue, or by using really big words, or by being as official as we possibly can. And we do the complete opposite. We do friendly and straightforward and ordinary language, and just we're a bunch of human beings trying to do something together.
One of the I'm going to draw it to a close before I hand back to Kate to close the session and tell us about the next one. But one of the most single inspiring experiences I've had myself was in the south of Italy, a network called VASAP. They basically are young farmers for the most part, with all the people around farming, and they meet in a field with bales of hay, wine and cheese and ham. And that's the sum total of their infrastructure. So much respect, so much holding of safety for each other, just inspiring, with very little technology, but just the trust that had built up. I'm going to take those two things away, cups of tea, and find who is trusted already in your region. Those two things to me are rather valuable takeaways from today. Can I just thank the my three guests tremendously? It's been a very rich session, and we'll post all of this on the Bioregional Learning Centre website shortly. I think it's bits of it for sure going to be on the YouTube bit. I'll hand over to Kate now, but thank you again very much for being here, and we'll see you in the next one in 2 weeks' time. So Kate, please close the session for us and tell us what happens next. Kate?
I think my connection's a little bit unstable. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. So yeah, thank you so much, John, for hosting. And thank you also, Chris, Brendan, Jan, for amazing presentations and a really, really insightful conversation. And thanks to all of you who attended as well and participated. Just quickly before we go, I'd just like to remind you to please fill out the Google form with the feedback on this session. Again, it's really, really important to us to understand what's working well and what's working less well. And then finally, just to let you know that we'll be back again on the 18th of June for conversation number 4 with Stuart Cowan of the Buckminster Fuller Institute, in conversation with Lawrence Grodeska of the Bay Delta Trust and Brandon Letzinger of Regenerate Cascadia. So thank you so much, everyone. Wishing you a really good evening.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thanks all. Bye. Nice job.
Thank you, everyone. It's fabulous.
Yeah, see you soon. That was a great session.
Thank you.